The autumn air felt dry, still, almost motionless, like time itself had paused in this quiet corner of Willow Creek. Callan Reyes wasn't looking for anything. Not really, just a quick stop before his meeting, a stroll through memory. He had planned to walk in, grab a coffee, and get back to the hotel. Simple, but then he saw her. Through the smudged window of the old bookstore, just beyond a crooked rack of second-hand paperbacks, stood the woman he thought he'd never see again. Ilani Monroe. Her back was turned, but he'd recognize that presence anywhere. The way she crouched, with gentle ease, helping a young boy tug up the zipper of his hoodie. A boy. The child looked up at her with a half-smile, and Callan's breath caught. Those eyes. Wide, intense. His eyes. He stopped moving. It was as though the street had emptied, the sounds had gone quiet, and all that remained was that one moment, a moment a decade in the making. Ilani stood, slowly. Their eyes met through the glass. She blinked, startled. The boy tugged at her hand. "Mom, can we go get ice cream now?" "Mom." The word hit him in the chest like a freight train. Callan took a step forward, unsure if his legs would hold. His voice came out hoarse, barely audible. "Ilani?" She didn't speak. Her lips parted slightly. Her hand remained on the boy's shoulder, as if anchoring her to this new life, the one he wasn't a part of. And just like that, the weight of 10 years, regret, success, silence, and unanswered questions came crashing down. Have you ever lost someone before you even understood how much they meant to you? Not because they left, but because you stopped reaching. Callan Reyes was a man who built entire skylines, shaped cities, signed billion-dollar deals. His name meant something. His face graced magazines, and his voice echoed in boardrooms. But none of that could prepare him for this, because while he was chasing greatness, he missed what really mattered. What if a single stolen voicemail could have rewritten an entire life? What if silence wasn't neglect, but an accident? And what if second chances don't come wrapped in apologies, but in the unexpected meeting of a man, a woman, and a child who never even knew his father's name? Stay with me. This isn't just a story about love lost. It's about what we do when life gives us a chance to make things right, even after we've shattered everything. If you've ever wished for a second chance, if you believe people can change even after they've made terrible mistakes, tap that like button. Share this story with someone who believes in forgiveness. And if this is your first time here, welcome to Mr. Ross Story Trail. Hit that subscribe button, because this story might just stay with you forever. Callan didn't move, not right away. There was a brief, fragile beat, the kind of pause that carries too many memories and not enough words. Ilani's expression didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It just stilled. She stood taller, protective, quiet, and the boy, her son, stepped closer to her side, naturally, unknowingly. Callan's chest felt heavy. He tried to form another word, anything, but none came. Instead, Ilani turned her gaze away, gently placed her hand on the boy's back, and guided him toward the sidewalk. She didn't rush. She didn't run, but she didn't stay either. As she walked past him, just feet away now, she glanced up one more time. There was pain in her eyes, but there was also peace. That hurt more than anything. She had healed. Without him, Callan stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching them disappear into the crowd. Ilani and the boy who shared his eyes and his bone structure and something else he couldn't name. He has to be mine. The thought didn't come gently. It thundered. A rush of memories came flooding in. Her laugh, her late-night texts, the soft "I love you" before he boarded the plane to New York, the promises they made under the stars, and then the silence. Why hadn't he called? Why hadn't he reached out? Even once. He thought she'd let go, moved on. So he buried it, focused on skyscrapers, kept his heart locked away in blueprints and board meetings. But now he was standing in his hometown, 10 years older, face to face with everything he lost and the child he never knew he had. He wanted to chase after her, say something, anything. But how do you speak when the guilt won't let you breathe? What do you say to the woman you once left behind when you realize she was never waiting at all, because she'd already given up? And what do you say to the child who looks at you like a stranger, but carries your features like a mirror? He ran his hand over his face. Everything inside him screamed to fix it, to explain, but his feet didn't move. Because even now, even knowing what he just saw, he wasn't sure he deserved to go after them. Maybe you've made a mistake that cost you more than you expected. Maybe you pushed someone away because you thought you weren't good enough. Or worse, because you were too scared to try. Or maybe you never got the chance to explain. But what if there was a way back? Not just to forgiveness, but to something better? The sun had shifted. Shadows now stretched longer across the street, but Callan still hadn't moved. Inside him, something old began to stir. Something he'd buried beneath deadlines, contracts, and a carefully built empire. It wasn't regret, not just regret. It was the ache of a man who finally saw the cost of silence. 10 years ago, he had everything to prove. The scholarship, the pressure, the late nights in New York. He convinced himself that building a future meant letting go of distractions. Even her, even Ilani. He never meant to forget her. But somehow, he did. Or maybe he just made peace with the noise drowning her out. But now, there were no distractions. Only truth. And a boy who looked at Ilani like she was his whole world, just like Callan once did. The voicemail. The memory hit him like a stone to the gut. She'd left a message. He never listened. His phone had been stolen. He remembered now. The panic, the days spent replacing passwords and trying to catch up on work. But he'd never checked the old voicemails when he got his number back. He didn't even think to. He assumed she'd moved on. She assumed he'd abandoned her. And between those two silences, a child was born. A cold sweat traced his spine. How many birthdays had he missed? First steps? First words? Did the boy ever ask who his father was? Did Ilani cry after putting him to bed? Did she stare at old messages at 2 a.m., wondering if he'd ever call back? Callan gripped the railing beside him, knuckles white. How do you make up for 10 years in a town where time never stopped? Some stories aren't just stories. They're warnings. They're reminders that real life doesn't come with rewinds. It comes with choices. Loud ones, quiet ones, and the kind you don't realize are permanent until it's far too late. This is a story about one man's mistake, about the silence that broke a bond, about a woman who refused to wait, and a child born in the shadow of unanswered questions. But this isn't a tragedy. It's about what happens when truth finally surfaces, when a man stops running, when a heart finally comes home. Willow Creek didn't ask much of you. Keep your head down. Be polite. Don't ask for too much. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be left alone. It was the kind of place where the air smelled like fried eggs and diesel before sunrise, and folks still waved at each other, even when they had nothing to say. It was quiet, dependable, and depending on who you asked, either comforting or suffocating. For Callan Reyes, it was the latter. He was raised on the edge of town, in a faded blue house with crooked shutters and an overgrown fence. His mother, Teresa, worked double shifts at the diner, and sometimes came home too tired to take off her shoes. His father was a ghost, just a name people stopped mentioning after a while. By 12, Callan had learned how to stretch a single box of cereal into a week, how to stay invisible in a crowded hallway, and how to fix a leaky faucet with duct tape and an old butter knife. He wasn't angry about it, not really, but deep down, he wanted more. Not riches, not fame, just space to grow. He wanted out, not because he hated where he came from, but because he knew he didn't belong standing still. School was a mixed bag. Teachers liked him because he was quiet and kept his head down. Students didn't notice him unless they needed help on math homework. He didn't play sports, didn't go to parties, but his notebooks were full of building sketches, bridges, towers, entire blocks of imagined cities. He didn't dream of being rich. He dreamed of building something that would last. That was his secret world, and it made the silence of his house a little easier to bear. In Willow Creek, nothing really changed. Same faces, same gossip, Same corner gas station that somehow always smelled like burnt coffee and pine cleaner. It was a town content with itself, proud of its slowness. But for a boy like Callan, slow felt like sinking. Still, he respected it. Willow Creek wasn't cruel, just limited. You stayed where you were, you married young, you worked a trade, and if you were lucky, someone remembered your name long enough to put it on a plaque in the firehouse lobby. But that life, it was never meant for him. There were nights when Callan would lie on the roof, staring at the stars until his back went numb from the shingles. He'd whisper his plans to the sky, how he'd one day live in a city where buildings touched, clouds, where people noticed him, where he could create something bigger than himself. Those nights weren't about escaping, they were about becoming. Still, even as he counted down the years until he could leave, part of him clung to the familiar. The way Mrs. Daly at the grocery store always slipped him a second chocolate bar when she thought no one was looking. The sound of wind brushing through dry cornfields. The rare mornings when his mother would sit beside him at breakfast, sipping coffee from her chipped mug, her eyes tired but proud. Even in a place he swore he'd outgrow, there were pieces of love stitched into the quiet. But love wasn't enough to make him stay, because Callan Reyes was born with a hunger no one in Willow Creek understood. Ilani Monroe arrived like color into a black and white sketch. She wasn't loud, but something about her made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. It wasn't beauty in the way magazines define it, it was presence. She had this way of leaning in when you spoke, as if your words deserved to be listened to. Really listened to. Her laugh, it never felt forced. Her questions, always thoughtful. Her silence, never empty. She was raised just outside town, in a small cottage with flower beds. Her mother kept alive through stubborn hope and borrowed watering cans. Her father was a high school music teacher, the kind who gave hugs, without warning, and played the piano with more emotion than Polish. Ilani grew up around books, music, and the kind of dinner table conversations where dreams were not just allowed, but expected. Where Callan learned to survive quietly, Ilani learned to live fully. She didn't care much for small-town politics or the suffocating way gossip traveled faster than phone calls. But she didn't rebel either. She walked her own line, respectful but unbothered by expectations. Where Callan studied blueprints, she sketched wildflowers in the margins of her notebooks. Where he wore muted tones, she liked mustard yellows, soft reds, clothes that looked like summer. Where he kept his eyes on the floor, she looked people directly in the face when she spoke. They had nothing in common. Until junior year. It was a Tuesday. Advanced U.S. History. Group project. Callan barely looked up when the teacher announced the partners. He just scribbled the assignment in his notebook and waited for the bell to ring. Callan and Ilani, you'll be presenting on civil movements post 1965. His pencil stopped. He'd never even had a full conversation with her. She belonged to a different orbit. One filled with music programs, poetry club meetings, and people who knew how to speak with ease. He didn't expect much when she sat down next to him in the library that afternoon. He was prepared for her to be polite, distracted, and do most of the talking. Instead, she raised an eyebrow and said, "You look like you haven't blinked since third period. Do you always focus this hard, or is it just me?" It took him a second to respond. "You're Ilani." She grinned. "So, you have blinked." That was how it started. Not with fireworks, not with slow-motion music and grand speeches, but with light sarcasm, shared notes, and a surprising rhythm. She challenged him, not aggressively, but thoughtfully. When he suggested slides, she said, "How about a story instead?" When he focused on facts, she brought in emotion. Where he was cautious, she was curious. Where he guarded everything, she cracked jokes and waited for him to laugh. And he did. Not right away, but when he did, it felt like something shifted in the air around them. The project was due in 2 weeks, but long after the deadline passed, they kept meeting up. First, it was to review extra credit. Then it was to study. Then it was just to be around each other. Callan found himself walking to class slower just to pass her locker. She started saving him a seat in the library, even when they didn't have homework. No one called it love. Not yet. But even the teachers started noticing how he looked different, lighter, and he did, because for the first time in his life, someone saw him and didn't flinch. They didn't call it dating at first. There were no declarations, no official titles, just quiet companionship, unspoken routines that turned into habits. She'd wait for him outside the library. He'd walk her home, sometimes saying nothing, sometimes talking about dreams that felt too big to fit in a town like Willow Creek. On weekends, they'd sit by the lake with their shoes off, letting the cold water skim their toes while Ilani read poetry aloud from her worn journal. Callan wasn't one for poems, but when she read, he listened like every word mattered. Sometimes she'd ask him about his sketches, the ones he never showed anyone else. "You draw cities like they're alive," she said once, running her finger over one of his blueprints. "Do you ever feel like you were born somewhere by mistake?" He nodded, not because he hated Willow Creek, but because she was the first person who'd ever asked. Their relationship was made of quiet magic. He wasn't used to being known, really known, but with Ilani, he didn't have to explain his silences. She understood that stillness was part of him, and loved him through it, not around it. She brought him out of himself. She made him laugh at stupid jokes. She dragged him into dance halls with squeaky floors. She made fun of his serious face until he grinned without meaning to. And slowly, Callan began to believe something he never dared before, that maybe love didn't require fixing everything first. Maybe it just required showing up. Their friends teased them. "Small towns don't hide affection well. You two are glued together," one classmate said. Ilani smirked and replied, "Only emotionally." Callan nearly choked on his water. They didn't rush it. Their first kiss was on the hood of his mother's car, parked behind the diner at midnight. The stars weren't even out that night, but he didn't care. When she kissed him, the world felt quiet for once. Not heavy, just still. They made promises in the way only teenagers can. To stick it out through college, to never stop calling, to meet at the lake on their anniversary every year, no matter what. There was no fear in those promises, just belief. They were young, but they weren't naive. They knew time would test them. But they also believed love could last if you wanted it bad enough. They became part of each other's rhythm. He showed her how to read blueprints. She taught him to listen to jazz. They carved their initials into the trunk of the old oak by the lake. Tiny, uneven letters, but full of meaning. It wasn't forever. Not yet. But it felt close. Then came the letter. A full-ride scholarship to an architecture program in New York, one of the best in the country. Callan didn't know how to tell her at first, not because he was afraid of her reaction, but because he knew everything would change the second he said it out loud. When he finally told her, she didn't cry. She hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. "This is what you were made for," she whispered. "Go build your dream. I'll be here." They spent the rest of the summer trying to make time slow down. But time doesn't care about goodbyes. It just moves. The day he left, she handed him a small sketchbook. "I want you to draw the places you go. Not buildings, moments." He kissed her, long and quiet, the kind of kiss that says, "Don't forget." As the bus pulled away, he looked back. She was still there, hand raised, smile trembling, but holding. That was Ilani, strong, even when her heart cracked. He held the sketchbook like a lifeline, not knowing he'd one day forget. It, in a New York drawer, untouched, unopened, full of what-ifs. Did you ever have a love that felt like the whole world in a small town? The kind you swore would never fade until time got in the way? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Because some loves stay with us, even when we leave them behind. There's a kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't burst through doors or light fireworks. It lingers, in glances, gestures, in the way two people start to move in rhythm without realizing it. That's how it was for Callan and Ilani. Their love grew quietly, like ivy up a wall. Slowly, then, all at once, they became each other's favorite place. When Callan had a rough shift helping his mother at the diner, Ilani would sneak him strawberry milkshakes from her dad's fridge. When Ilani fought with her older sister, she'd show up at his door with tear-streaked cheeks and a borrowed blanket, just needing stillness. Their favorite place was the lake. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was theirs. They'd lay on the hood of his rusted-out car, counting stars they couldn't name, mapping fake constellations, sharing music through a split headphone jack. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was safe, comfortable. One night, when the town was asleep and the lake barely rippled, Ilani turned toward him and said, "Do you ever feel like there's more waiting for you, but you're afraid to leave what's already here?" Callan stared up at the sky. "Every day." She nodded. "Me too." They laughed in their own language. Inside jokes built from years of growing side by side. She'd raise an eyebrow and say, "Library face," whenever he got too serious. He'd call her sunflower brain when she wandered off mid-sentence with a new idea. They fought sometimes too, not loudly, but with tension that crackled in the air. She wanted him to open up more. He wanted her to stop trying to fix what wasn't broken. But every disagreement ended the same way. A walk around the lake. One of them would start talking again. The other would listen. And by the end, they were always holding hands. They shared firsts together. First kiss. First weekend away, camping in a leaky tent that collapsed at 3 a.m. First shared playlist. First conversation about marriage. Half serious, half dream. Once, while curled up in the back of her dad's pickup after a school dance, she whispered, "I hope we never become strangers." Callan didn't say anything at first. Then, softly, "We won't." He'd never felt more alive than when he was with her. She made the future feel reachable, not just a sketch in his notebook. With Ilani, he could talk about things he never told anyone else. The time he found a letter his father left behind but never opened. The guilt he carried watching his mom age faster than she should. The fear that one day he'd make it big and forget who he was. Ilani never promised to fix him. She just stayed. Steady, curious, kind. Once, as they watched the sky burn pink over the water, she reached for his hand and said, "You're going to change the world, but I hope, no matter how far you go, you leave a piece of yourself here." Callan was good at hiding things from the world, but with Ilani, he didn't have to. She peeled back his layers with patience, never rushing, never demanding. When he doubted his own dreams, she reminded him of his brilliance, not with flattery, but with faith. "You don't just build things, Callan," she once said. "You see them before they exist. That's a rare kind of magic." Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, grounded. She didn't need him to have all the answers. He didn't expect her to always understand. They were learning, together, and in a town where nothing changed, they were each other's change. The summer before senior year, Callan found a rhythm. Between working at the diner, school, assignments, and late-night drives with Ilani, things finally felt like they made sense. He still woke up early, helped his mom with bills, scribbled designs, in a sketch pad on lunch breaks. But now, he wasn't just surviving. He was building towards something, and a big part of that came from her. Ilani believed in him with a kind of conviction that left no room for doubt. Not the noisy kind, not performative, just constant, quiet, present. She didn't need to see the finished version of his dreams. She trusted the blueprint. "You think too small sometimes," she told him once while flipping through his sketches. "You're designing buildings for small towns when I know you want to build cities." "I can't afford to think big," he answered, brushing pencil marks from the paper. Ilani tapped the page. "You can't afford not to." That moment stayed with him. She kept pushing him. Signed him up for a design competition behind his back. Taped a list of scholarship deadlines inside his locker. Even got his mom to agree to take fewer shifts if it meant Callan could focus on applications. Callan didn't protest. Not because he wasn't scared, but because with her in his corner, fear didn't get to steer the wheel. The scholarship news came on a Thursday. He found the envelope waiting on the kitchen table after school, a thick one with the logo of a university he only ever dreamed about, an elite architecture institute in New York, known for turning dreamers into legends. His hands trembled as he opened it. Full ride. Housing, books, a spot in the fall cohort. Callan sat down on the edge of the kitchen chair and just stared at the words. His mother stood in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him. Finally, he looked up, voice cracking. "It's real." She came to him slowly, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You earned this," she said. He didn't cry, but something inside him softened in a way it hadn't in years. Ilani was the first person he told. He didn't call. He ran. Literally. He sprinted down the road, barefoot, gripping the envelope like it might vanish, heart pounding. She was on the porch, sketching with a colored pencil between her teeth. When she saw him, she stood. He didn't say anything, just handed her the letter. She read it in silence, then smiled, not wide, not loud, just deeply. "I told you," she whispered. They sat on her front steps, the letter between them, a shared victory. "You're really going," she said. Callan nodded. She didn't flinch, didn't fake excitement or hide sadness. "I want this for you," she said, "more than anything, even if it means leaving." Ilani looked at him, her voice steady. "Dreams aren't always supposed to fit into the same zip code. We'll figure it out." Callan exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "I don't want to lose us." "You won't," she said, with a certainty he didn't know he needed. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, they went to the lake again. No words, just the water, the sky, and the sound of her head resting on his shoulder. Callan closed his eyes, holding that moment like a photograph, one he could return to whenever the world got too loud. The last few weeks before Callan's departure felt like they were counting down to something no one had the heart to name. They did everything they could to pretend it wasn't ending. More time at the lake. More notes passed during class. More kisses that lingered a little longer than usual. But goodbyes don't wait for you to be ready. Ilani planned a small farewell gathering, just close friends, his mom, and a few teachers who had seen something in him years before he saw it himself. She baked cupcakes shaped like tiny buildings. He laughed when he saw them. Architecture-themed pastries. He asked. She shrugged. "You're starting a brand." But her eyes gave her away. They weren't full of celebration. They were full of holding it together. The night before he left, they sat in the back of his truck, parked under the oak tree by the lake. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Ilani broke the silence. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do without you here." Callan reached for her hand. "I'll still be here, just not in the same place." "It's not the same." He didn't argue. Because she was right. She leaned her head on his shoulder, voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let them change you. The city, the pressure, the people who think they know better than you. I won't. And promise you'll call. Even if it's late. Even if it's just to hear my voice. I promise." She turned to face him, eyes searching his like she was memorizing them. "Don't disappear, Callan." He cupped her cheek. "I'd rather lose everything than lose you." The next morning, the sky was cloudless and unfairly bright. His mom cried in the kitchen when she hugged him, told him she was proud, told him not to forget to eat. Ilani waited by the bus stop. She didn't cry, not then, not in front of him, but her grip on his hand was firm, desperate without being dramatic. They kissed once, then again, slower. No fanfare, no final words, just eyes that said, "Come back to me." He boarded the bus with her letter tucked in the front pocket of his backpack. Inside was a sketch of the two of them, drawn in her favorite soft pencil strokes. Below it, in her handwriting, "I'll be loving you from here, so go love the world from there." As the bus pulled away, Callan looked back one more time. She stood still, arms crossed over her chest, chin trembling. He pressed his palm to the window, wishing he could reach through it and stay. But dreams don't wait, and he had a future to build. That was the last time he saw Willow Creek for 10 years, and the last time Ilani watched him leave without knowing she'd be the one left holding more than just memories. New York didn't care where you came from. It didn't care about small towns or whispered promises or letters folded in jacket pockets. It moved fast, and it demanded more. The moment Callan stepped onto campus, he knew he wasn't in Willow Creek anymore. The buildings were bigger, the noise louder, the people quicker. There was no space to pause, No room for hesitation. Classes started at 7, ended after dark. There were sketches to revise, critiques to survive, competitions to win, and professors who pushed you until your knuckles ached from holding pencils too tight. In his first month alone, he went through 3 notebooks, 6 graphite pencils, and at least 1 mental breakdown. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were an afterthought. Ambition was the only currency that mattered here, and Callan was determined to earn every inch of the dream he'd fought so hard to reach. But the more he poured into the work, the less space there was for everything else. His phone buzzed with Ilani's name late at night. He'd silence it just for a few minutes while he finished a draft, then forget to reply. Her messages turned from full paragraphs to quiet check-ins. Miss you. Call when you can. You okay? He'd mean to answer, really. But between all-nighters, studio deadlines, and group projects with people who barely knew his name, the messages blurred together. He convinced himself she understood. She knew what this meant to him. She'd wait. She always had. A month passed. Then 2. Ilani's voice started to sound different on the phone. Not angry, just distant. When they spoke, it was mostly small talk. He didn't know what to say. She didn't want to interrupt his rhythm. One night she said, "Feels like I'm talking to your shadow." He laughed it off, said, "I'm just tired." But she knew tired. And this wasn't it. This was something else. His roommate joked that he was dating his drafting table. Callan didn't correct him. He told himself it was just a phase, just a season. Once he proved himself, once he caught up, once he built a foundation, then he'd have time for Ilani again. But by then, something had already started slipping, and the distance between them was no longer measured in miles. Ilani tried to hold on. She sent him photos of her day, videos of the lake, inside jokes, memes, even a picture of the sketchbook he'd left behind. No response, or worse, short replies that read like obligations. "Everything okay?" she texted one night. Callan looked at the message during a class break, thumbs hovering. Then class resumed, and the message was buried under notifications and unread emails. He told himself he'd respond later, but he didn't. Ilani had never been afraid of silence, until it came from Callan. At first, she made excuses for him. Architecture school was intense. He needed space. He'd call soon, but space turned into silence, and silence turned into doubt. She reread their old messages at night, flipping through the months of late-night love notes and sketches they once exchanged. The emojis, the inside jokes, the half-planned future. Now, most of her texts sat beneath a cold, gray-delivered, no reply. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her started folding in on itself. She started writing letters she never sent. Pages of unfiltered honesty, frustration, longing, confusion. "I know you're busy. I know New York is loud. But I'm here, still yours. Are you still mine?" Ilani tried to distract herself, volunteering at the library, helping. Her mom planned a second garden bed, taking long walks by the lake, but nothing filled the Callan-shaped gap in her chest. Then came the nausea. It started one morning in the kitchen. The smell of eggs made her stomach turn. She thought it was stress or exhaustion, until it didn't stop. 2 more days, then a trip to the pharmacy. Then 2 lines. She sat on her bed for hours that afternoon, pregnancy test in hand, knees pulled to her chest, the world muffled behind the hum of a nearby fan. It wasn't panic. Not yet. It was something quieter, heavier. She didn't tell anyone, not even her mother, not until she called him. She stared at the phone screen for minutes before pressing the button. It rang, straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same thing. Once more, nothing. Finally, she left a message. Her voice shook, but she spoke slowly, trying to stay calm, trying not to sound broken. "Callan, I'm pregnant. I don't want to do this without you, but I will if I have to. Please, just call me." She hung up, then stared at the screen, waiting for it to light up. It didn't. Next morning, she called again. Voicemail. Again, that night. Still nothing. She sat by the lake later that evening, arms wrapped around herself, wind pressing against her back. She looked out at the water, the same place where they once dreamed together. Now she was dreaming alone. She whispered to the air, "I don't know what hurts more, that you didn't answer, or that part of me still hopes you will." Callan had just pulled another all-nighter. He was halfway across the city, juggling a rolled-up poster board under one arm, a half-eaten protein bar in his mouth, and the weight of a looming critique that could make or break his midterm grade. The subway station was packed, too packed, the kind of crowd where movement felt more like being pulled than walking. He was tired, distracted. It happened fast. A shoulder brushed him too hard. His backpack, half-zipped, shifted. The weight changed. He didn't notice until the train pulled away and his stomach dropped. Phone, wallet, gone. He ran through the motions, filing a report, canceling cards, replacing IDs. But the phone, that hit differently. It wasn't just a device. It was his link to home, to Ilani. At least, it used to be. He hadn't heard her voice in weeks. He told himself she understood, that she was giving him space, that they were still fine, just busy, that was all. He figured once things calmed down, he'd call her. Explain, apologize, everything would make sense again. A week later, he finally set up a new phone, reconnected to his accounts, installed apps, restored his contacts, but he never checked the voicemails, not out of neglect, just exhaustion. He assumed if she needed him, she'd message again. But she didn't, and he didn't ask why. Back in Willow Creek, Ilani sat on her bedroom floor, arms wrapped around her knees. It had been 5 days since she left the voicemail. Still nothing. At first, she rationalized. Maybe he didn't see it. Maybe his phone was dead. Maybe school had swallowed him again. But the excuses ran out, and with each hour that passed, the silence became its own answer. She stopped calling, stopped texting. The last thing she sent him was a photo of her holding the sketchbook he left behind. No caption. It was open to the page where he'd once drawn a little house by a lake, labeled Someday. But someday never came. Ilani never told anyone what had happened. She carried the truth like a stone tucked into her pocket, present but invisible to everyone else. She got a job shelving books at the library, took prenatal vitamins in secret, read articles about single parenting at night, alone. One morning, she wrote his name on a piece of paper, stared at it, then folded it once, twice, and burned it in a coffee tin behind the house. Not out of anger, but because it hurt too much to keep holding on to someone who wouldn't reach back. By the time her belly began to show, the town had moved on. People whispered. Of course, Willow Creek was small, but Ilani didn't flinch. She held her head high, wore soft clothes, and kept walking. She never spoke his name again. Back in New York, Callan kept climbing. Studio critiques, internships, late nights, networking events. He told himself he'd check in with her soon. But days turned to weeks, weeks into months, and without knowing it, he missed the most important message of his life. The day Callan lost his backpack, the sky was pale and sharp with cold. It was the kind of morning that made people tuck their chins into their jackets and keep walking. He had just finished presenting his final project, a massive, multi-layered structure inspired by forgotten neighborhoods and functional beauty. It had taken him weeks, days without sleep, meals skipped, fingertips smudged with graphite and ink. He was proud of it, proud enough to feel for once like he belonged. The train was crowded that afternoon, packed tight. Callan wedged himself near the back, headphones in, bag looped loosely over one shoulder. A man brushed by. Another bumped him from behind. It felt normal. Just another day in a city that never slowed down. He didn't notice the weight shift until it was too late. By the time he reached his stop, the back pocket was open. Gone. Inside that backpack was his laptop, his wallet, sketches, and his phone. At first, panic surged, not because of the wallet. He could cancel cards, Not because of the laptop. It was backed up. It was the phone, the connections, the photos, the messages. Everything that wasn't saved elsewhere lived there, including Ilani's voice. He reported the theft, walked through the proper steps, filed paperwork, borrowed a roommate's device to reset passwords. But replacing the phone took days, and when he finally got a new one, he didn't import the old voicemail manually. He told himself it didn't matter. If it was urgent, she would have reached out again. He was already behind on his next studio project, already behind on sleep. He couldn't afford distractions. At least that's what he told himself. But there was one thing he never knew. A message waited for him, sitting silently on the old account. We, the audience, hear it now. Callan, I'm pregnant. I don't want to do this without you, but I will if I have to. Please, just call me. He never heard it, never saw it. It sat there. One unread notification that could have rewritten everything. But life doesn't always wait for explanations. Back in Willow Creek, she watched her body change in the mirror, month by month. She listened to songs they once danced to with a hand resting on her stomach. She cried sometimes, quietly, only when no one else was home. Her mother figured it out around month 4. Ilani expected judgment. Instead, her mother reached for her hand and said, "Then we raise him in love." Not we as in Ilani and Callan, but we as in the people who stayed. Ilani started journaling again, late nights, early mornings. Her final entry before packing her bags read, "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I will raise him strong. I will raise him kind. And if one day he asks why his father wasn't there, I'll tell him the truth. Not the angry truth, just the honest one. He didn't show up." Ilani left Willow Creek on a Thursday morning. She didn't tell many people, just her mother, her boss at the library, and the woman who had always trimmed her hair in the back of the salon for free. No big announcement. No teary farewells. She packed her life into 2 suitcases, folded the baby's ultrasound picture into a hardcover journal, and kissed the front porch one last time. The town didn't ask questions. They noticed the absence, sure, but in small towns, people learn to nod instead of pry. Some whispered, some wondered, but Ilani had made peace with their assumptions. Let them think she left for a job, for a new chapter, for space. Only she, and the small heartbeat growing inside her, knew the real reason. She settled in a nearby city, not too far, but far enough that she could disappear from old routines. She found work in a community art center, helping children paint, sculpt, and write their way through the world. Her belly grew, so did her courage. She bought second-hand clothes, read every parenting book the library had, chose a name after flipping through pages for weeks. Eli. It meant uplifted. She liked the sound of that. Meanwhile, in New York, Callan buried himself deeper. The workload didn't slow down. Neither did he. Late nights became normal. Studio critiques were brutal. Expectations climbed. He didn't talk about Ilani, not to classmates, not even to himself. He told himself the silence was mutual, that if she really missed him, she would have reached out again, that maybe she realized the distance was too much, that maybe she moved on. And somewhere inside that pile of assumptions, he stopped wondering. The truth was harder to admit. He was afraid she'd changed, afraid he had, afraid of what it would mean if she was no longer waiting. He looked her up once, just once, typed her name into a search bar. Nothing, no social media accounts, no updates, no trace. He took that as confirmation. She's gone. What he didn't know was that her profiles had been deleted, not out of anger, just necessity, a way to start clean, a way to control her own story. So, he built something else instead. Walls, routines, discipline. He got his first internship with a boutique design firm before graduation, began building a reputation. People started to take notice. They called him focused, driven, but beneath the surface, there was a part of him still holding its breath, still hearing her voice in quiet moments, still seeing her smile when he sketched alone. He never told anyone about the girl from Willow Creek. the one who believed in him before anyone else did. He told himself it was better that way. But some silences don't mean peace. Some are just pauses, before everything comes back louder than ever. The years that followed were a blur of ambition. Callan graduated at the top of his class, took a job in the city, then another, each move more strategic than the last. He mastered the game. Clients, deadlines, skyscrapers. Recognition came. So did awards. His name started appearing in magazines. People began asking him to speak at conferences, and yet, beneath all the applause, he felt nothing. He filled his apartment with sleek furniture and sharp lighting. Everything was colorless, minimal, controlled. There were no photographs, no handwritten notes, no trace of softness. He dated occasionally, briefly, long enough to show up at a gala, short enough to forget birthdays. None of it stuck. They didn't laugh like she did, didn't ask about his sketches, didn't sit beside him in silence without needing to fill it. He told himself he was fine, that letting go of Ilani had been the right choice, that she probably moved on, had a good life, maybe even got married, that her silence proved she never really meant forever. The story was easier to believe than the alternative, that she had called, that he had missed it, that everything that came after was built on the foundation of a moment he never even heard. He used the pain the only way he knew how, as fuel. Hours. Bigger contracts, bigger buildings. The taller the structures grew, the smaller the voice inside him became, the one that still whispered her name. He never returned to Willow Creek. Not once. Not even for holidays. Not even when his mother asked. He said he was too busy, said he didn't belong there anymore. But the truth? He couldn't face the places that still held her memory. There was a sketch he kept tucked in the back of an old drawer, one she had given him, the two of them, side by side, beneath a tree by the lake. He never hung it up, never threw it out either. Some nights, after long days in boardrooms and meetings, he'd stare at it in the dark and wonder if she ever thought of him. Ilani didn't, not often, not because she forgot, but because she'd taught herself how to live without him. Eli had her eyes, her energy, but his expression, his focus, his quiet stare, that was Callan. She never said it out loud, never told her son the full story. Not yet. She didn't hate Callan. She had just stopped waiting. Time passed. He built towers. She built a home. He chased legacy. She raised a life. Neither knew how close they still were. One holding regret he never understood. The other holding forgiveness she never had the chance to give. The delivery room was quiet when Eli arrived. Not silent, but still, like the world had held its breath and exhaled all at once. Ilani cried, of course, but not out of fear. It was relief, because for the first time in months, she wasn't holding this journey alone. Eli came into the world with Callan's eyes, sharp, alert, constantly scanning, but his energy was hers, gentle, warm, and full of questions before he could even speak. Ilani took him home to a modest two-bedroom apartment with thin walls and old tile floors. The crib was second-hand. The baby monitor didn't always work. But the love, that was new. That was overflowing. She read to him every night, stories of oceans, skies, trees that whispered, and animals who found their way home. Eli listened like the words were made just for him. The early years were hard. There were nights when he wouldn't sleep. Days when her body ached from working the front desk at the community arts center, while running errands in between nap schedules and doctor's appointments. She missed meals, skipped rest, but not once, not even in the deepest exhaustion, did she regret him. He smiled early, laughed often, and when he cried, it wasn't loud. It was like watching his little heart crack open with honesty. Ilani recorded everything. First steps in a too-small hallway. First word, book, not mama. First time he fell and didn't cry, just stood back up with a quiet frown and kept going. That one made her tear up, because it reminded her of someone else. Eli grew with wonder in his bones. He'd sit by the window for hours, watching birds build nests. He'd ask how bridges stayed up, why the moon moved, what made clouds float. At 4, He took apart the remote just to see how it worked. Ilani laughed through the frustration. "That's not how it goes back together," she said. Eli just grinned. "I'll figure it out." He always tried, always wanted to understand. That was Callan's mind. No doubt about it. They made a life, just the two of them. Mornings began with cereal and cartoons. Evenings ended with books and slow lullabies Ilani hummed without knowing she remembered them. She gave him everything she could. When she didn't have enough, she gave time. When she didn't have time, she gave presence. He never felt like he lacked, because he didn't, not with her. But some nights, when he was fast asleep, curled on his side with one arm tucked beneath his cheek, Ilani would sit on the edge of the bed, watching him breathe, and wonder, would Callan recognize him? Would he feel what she felt, just from one look? Would he understand what he missed? She didn't dwell there long. Life kept moving. Lunches had to be packed. Rent had to be paid. Eli's shoes always needed replacing. There was no room for ghosts. By age 6, Eli was a talker. Not loud, just persistent. He'd ask questions like a detective on a mission, tugging at ideas until they unraveled into something he could hold in his hands. How do elevators know which floor to stop on? Why do grown-ups say, "I'm fine," when they're not? Can dreams be real if you feel them when you wake up? Ilani never rushed her answers, even when she didn't know. "I think," she would say, "that's something we get to find out together." Eli liked that. He liked figuring things out, with her. He had a sketch pad by the time he was 7, not for cartoons, but for ideas. He drew floor plans, tiny neighborhoods, rooms with trapdoors and bookshelves that opened if you pressed the right tile. "I want to build stuff that people live in," he said once. But not just for rich people. Like homes that feel like hugs. Ilani swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's beautiful," she said. He shrugged. "You said homes should feel safe, like stories you never want to leave." Ilani worked longer hours now. Eli stayed at a local after-school program. He didn't mind. He liked the structure. He liked that he got to help the younger kids figure out puzzles and art projects. One day, while waiting in the staff lounge for her shift to end, Eli looked up at the muted television on the wall. The volume was low, but the caption bar read, "Callan Reyes, Rebuilding Cities with Heart." Ilani had been signing out time cards. She turned just as the camera panned to Callan. Older now, polished, taller, his jaw sharper. His suit fitted, but the eyes, still the same. Her heart clenched before her brain could catch up. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Callan was speaking to a reporter, gesturing toward digital blueprints, explaining something about vertical integration and low-emission materials. His voice was confident, focused. The screen flashed a graphic of a building he'd designed. Sleek, impressive, nothing like the sketches he used to show her under the stars. Then the clip ended, just like that. The image was gone. Ilani stood in place for a moment too long. Not because she missed him, but because the ache came from somewhere deeper, a quiet reminder of what he never knew, what he might never know. That night, she didn't bring it up. Not to Eli, not to anyone. She made dinner, read his favorite chapter from the space adventure book, and kissed his forehead 3 times like she always did. But when he asked why her eyes looked tired, she just smiled. "Long day," she said, and left it at that. She didn't Google him after that. Didn't search for more. She'd seen enough. He was out there, building a world he once promised to share with her. But she was here, raising the part of him that never left. It was a quiet evening, one of those late Sundays where everything felt slow and full. Dinner was finished, dishes done. Eli was on the living room rug, building something from mismatched blocks and leftover cardboard tubes. Ilani sat nearby, folding laundry, humming softly without realizing. He was 8 now, taller, thoughtful, still more observant than most kids twice his age. That's when he asked, "Mom?" She looked up. He didn't glance over, just kept stacking blocks. "Do I have a dad?" The question didn't hit like a punch. It hit like a door slowly creaking open. One she'd known he would reach, eventually, but had prayed she'd have a little more time before facing. She set the towel in her lap and took a breath. "Yes," she said gently. "You do." He nodded slowly, still focused on his tower. "Where is he?" She watched his hands carefully place another block. She had rehearsed this answer in her mind more times than she could count, and yet, in this moment, it still trembled behind her ribs. "He's not here," she said. "He hasn't been." Another nod. "Did he know about me?" Ilani's eyes burned, but she blinked it away. "No, he didn't." Eli finally turned to look at her, eyes wide, his father's eyes every time. "Why not?" She didn't rush her reply. "Because I tried to tell him, but something got in the way, and by the time I didn't hear back, I had to choose whether to wait or move forward. He didn't say anything." She added softly, "I chose you." Eli let the silence stretch, then looked down at the half-finished tower. "Do you think he would have stayed if he knew?" Ilani moved to the rug, sat cross-legged beside him. "I don't know, baby. I really don't. But I do know this. He missed out on someone incredible." Eli smiled faintly. "You mean me?" She nodded. "You. Every day of your life, you've been my reason to keep going." They didn't talk about it again that night. They built a spaceship instead. Ilani didn't cry until he was asleep. Quietly, in the hallway. Not from regret, just from the weight of years she'd carried alone, and the grace of a boy who never once made her feel alone for it. She would never speak badly of Callan. That was a decision she made long ago. If Eli grew up asking more questions, she'd answer each one with honesty. Not bitterness. She owed him truth. Not a villain, not a fantasy, just reality, and her love, steady through it all. In that moment, she knew something clearly. Eli didn't need a storybook ending. He just needed to know he was wanted, that he was loved, that he came from something, even if it broke before it began. They called him a visionary. Callan Reyes is redefining urban living, from small-town beginnings to architectural elite. He doesn't just build structures. He reimagines space. The headlines piled up. So did the invitations, industry panels, investment offers, international deals. Clients lined up to attach their names to his. Real estate firms used his designs to sell dreams wrapped in glass and steel. He made the cover of 3 business magazines in 1 year, but none of that filled him. His calendar was full. His voicemail always had a backlog. His apartment was on the 44th floor, overlooking a skyline he helped design. But nights were still quiet, too quiet. He dated beautiful, educated, successful women, the kind you bring to fundraisers and rooftop dinners. But after a few weeks, it always ended the same way. Too distant, too distracted, too unavailable. One of them said, "You talk about your projects like they're people, but when I ask about your past, it's like you disappear." He said nothing, because she wasn't wrong. He saw a therapist for a few months, mostly because his assistant kept rescheduling appointments until he gave in. "I don't need help," he told the woman across the leather chair. But she wasn't convinced. "You work 80 hours a week, you don't take vacations, and you flinch when I ask about your childhood. Something's keeping you from resting." He didn't go back after the 6th session, but the dreams kept coming. The same one. Ilani, sitting by the lake, holding a notebook, turning pages slowly. But when he tried to speak, no sound came out. When he reached for her, she was always just out of reach. He'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, then brush it off and go build another tower. He never spoke her name out loud. Not to friends, not to colleagues, not even to himself, but her memory lived beneath every steel beam and foundation line. Then came the Willow Creek proposal. A major developer wanted to acquire farmland outside the town for a sustainable housing concept. They approached Callan directly, told him it would be a full-circle moment. "Returning to your roots," they said. He resisted. At first, too many ghosts in that soil. But the design challenge intrigued him. Low-density living, energy-positive structures, modern comfort in a rural setting. After a few weeks of negotiation, he agreed. One condition, he would lead the project personally. The flight was booked, the design pitch drafted, and the Willow Creek proposal filed under expansion project, rural redevelopment. But Callan couldn't sleep. The night before his scheduled departure, he sat on his apartment floor, papers scattered around him like fallen leaves. He wasn't reviewing blueprints. He was looking for something he couldn't name. He told his assistant it was just business. He told himself he didn't care. But the moment he saw the address printed on the project folder, Willow Creek, NC, his stomach had twisted. He hadn't said that town's name out loud in almost a decade. He hadn't seen its roads, heard its silence, or touched its soil since the day he left with a scholarship in one hand and a kiss goodbye still warm on his lips. He had buried that part of himself in deadlines and concrete, and yet, here it was, rising again. He opened the drawer he never touched, the one beneath old tax files and expired insurance cards. Inside was a single folder, faded blue, covered in dust. He hadn't meant to keep it. But he couldn't bring himself to throw it out either. Inside was a folded page, Ilani's sketch. She had drawn it for him during their last summer together. A small house on a hill, a tree near the edge, a winding path leading to a lake, two figures sitting on the steps, small but unmistakably them. She'd drawn his signature baseball cap, her loose curls, their initials carved into the tree trunk beside them. Below the image, in her delicate handwriting, "Wherever you go, save a place for us." He stared at it now, heart beating louder than the traffic below his window. He remembered how she gave it to him, tucked into his sketchbook the day before he boarded the bus. He'd barely looked at it then, just smiled, kissed her, and promised to call. That promise still burned in his throat. He traced the drawing with one finger. She'd been so steady, so certain. He'd been so sure she'd wait. But people only wait so long. He wondered where she was now, if she was still in town, if she was married, if she remembered him. He didn't have the courage to look her up. Not yet. The next morning, he zipped up his suitcase, slipped the sketch into the inside pocket, and stood by the window. The skyline outside was breathtaking, monuments to everything he had built, but in that moment, none of it felt like home. It had been 10 years, 10 years of success, 10 years of noise, 10 years without her. And now, for reasons he wouldn't name, he was going back. The airport felt like any other. Gate announcements, coffee carts, the hum of travelers caught in their own schedules. But for Callan, the air felt heavier, sharper. He hadn't packed much, just a carry-on, his laptop, and the folder with Ilani's drawing tucked inside, pressed between contracts and site reports, as if it belonged there. It didn't. That was the point. On the plane, he watched the city disappear beneath him, steel and glass shrinking into patchwork. His kingdom, from above, looked small, manageable. When the wheels left the ground, he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The flight was short. Still, every second felt stretched. He flipped through documents, read nothing. Checked emails, replied to no one. His mind was already back in North Carolina, back in a place where time once moved like water, quiet, constant, and full of things unspoken. The car ride from the airport to Willow Creek was quieter than he expected. The roads got narrower, the trees taller, towns smaller. He passed gas stations with handwritten signs, diners with chipped paint, and back roads that held pieces of his past, like a secret they had agreed to keep. The air felt different here, not fresher, not better, just known. When the Welcome to Willow Creek sign came into view, his chest tightened. The same peeling white paint, the same crooked metal post leaning slightly left, 10 years gone, and it hadn't moved an inch. He had, in every possible way. And yet, part of him still felt 16, walking these sidewalks, holding dreams too big for his hands. He drove past the old diner where his mother used to work. The windows were fogged. The neon sign still flickered in the corner. For a moment, he thought about stopping, seeing if someone he knew still worked there. He kept driving. He passed the school, the park, the lake. Everything looked smaller now, but not faded, just paused, waiting. His hotel was near the edge of town, newer, clean, no history attached, exactly what he thought he needed. But that night, as he stood by the window, looking out over the distant silhouettes of houses and hills, he felt the quiet return. Not the empty kind, the kind that waits, listens. He pressed his hand against the glass. Somewhere out there, she might still be here. Somewhere out there, there might be a boy with his eyes and her smile. And tomorrow, he would find out. Willow Creek hadn't changed. Not in the ways that mattered. The sidewalks still cracked beneath tree roots. The storefronts still displayed the same faded signs. The air still smelled like morning dust and distant fields. But Callan had. And now, as he walked its streets again, he felt like an intruder in a life he'd left behind. He kept his head low, hands in pockets, heart pounding too loudly for someone who was supposed to be home. The plan had been simple. Check on the proposed land site, meet with city officials, return to New York. In, out, clean, no emotion. But nothing about being back felt clean. Every corner held a memory. Every building whispered a name. And hers? It was everywhere. He passed the high school, the old tire shop, the corner where they'd shared milkshakes at 17, trying to guess the future like it was a game they could win. His feet moved on their own, not toward the hotel, not toward City Hall, but downtown. The sun hung low, brushing the tops of buildings with golden light. And then he saw it. The bookstore. Same crooked awning, same dusty windows, same old bench out front with initials carved into its edge. He paused, not because of the store itself, but because, through the glass, he saw something that made the world stop spinning. A woman helping a boy zip up his hoodie. Not just any woman. Ilani. He couldn't breathe. 10 years collapsed into seconds. Same posture, same calm, same quiet focus. Her hair was longer now, tied back loosely. There were faint lines near her eyes, not from age, but from living. She looked stronger, softer, wiser. And the boy. Callan's heart stuttered. He looked around 7, maybe 8. Brown skin, soft curls, Callan's eyes, Callan's jaw. The resemblance was undeniable. His throat went dry. They were laughing about something. She knelt beside the boy, adjusting his sleeve, brushing something off his shoulder. A gesture full of instinct, full of love. Callan couldn't move, couldn't think. The sounds of the street faded. People walked past him, but he didn't notice. He was locked in place, watching a version of his life he'd never known existed. A version where she kept going, where she raised a child, his child, without him. She stood. The boy tugged at her hand. "Mom, can we go get ice cream now?" Callan's heart cracked. "Mom." The word thundered inside him. She turned. Their eyes met. Instant, sharp, her body stiffened. Recognition. And then, a flicker of something deeper. Not joy, not anger. Shock. Hesitation. Protection. Callan stepped forward. Just one step. Ilani? Her lips parted, but no sound came. She pulled the boy closer with a small, instinctive motion. Not hostile, not panicked, just careful. Callan's voice broke again. "It's me." As if that would explain anything. As if that could fix 10 years of silence. The boy looked up, curious, confused. Ilani's gaze didn't leave Callan's face. Not for a second. Then, calmly, steadily, she spoke. "Eli, wait by the bench for a minute, okay?" The boy nodded and walked a few feet away. Ilani faced him fully now, closer than he dared imagine. 10 years gone, and still, somehow, it felt like no time and too much time had passed at once. He had imagined this moment in dreams, always different. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she cried, sometimes she disappeared before he could reach her. But this was nothing like any of those versions. This was real, and reality had sharper edges. Callan opened his mouth, but the words caught. He wasn't sure what could ever be enough to fill a decade of silence. She looked at him, not like a stranger, not like a lover, like someone remembering how to breathe through a bruise. "I didn't know you were in town," she said, her voice calm but measured. Her voice hadn't changed. Still warm, still grounded. Callan cleared his throat. "Work. There's a development project. Some land west of the highway." She nodded once. Of course. Polite, neutral, nothing revealing. It gutted him. He glanced toward the boy on the bench. Eli, his son. There were no words for that feeling, no frame to hold it, only the overwhelming weight of what he hadn't known and what he hadn't been. He's beautiful," Callan said softly. Ilani's eyes flicked to Eli, then back to Callan. "He is. He looks like you." Her lips curved almost. "He looks like someone else too." That landed like a quiet strike. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Ilani, I didn't know, I swear to you. I never heard that voicemail. I left more than one." His stomach twisted. "I lost my phone. My bag was stolen. I was trying to keep my life from falling apart and—" She held up a hand, not in anger, but final. "I'm not asking for explanations," she said. "Not right now." They stood in silence. Eli kicked his legs softly on the bench, completely unaware of the history unfolding 10 feet away. Callan searched her face. There were stories in her eyes, stories she hadn't told, nights she didn't sleep, moments she stood strong when everything inside her was shaking. "I should have tried harder," he said quietly, "to find you. I told myself you moved on, that you didn't want me anymore. But really, I was scared." Ilani didn't deny it, didn't soften the truth either. "I had to keep going," she replied. "For him, not for me." She exhaled slowly, as if releasing the weight of words she'd carried for too long. "I won't do this here, not in front of him." Callan nodded. "Can we talk? Somewhere familiar?" She looked down for a beat, then back up. The oak tree. Of course, their place. Before the world changed, before things were lost. "I'll be there," he said. Her eyes didn't waver. "Tomorrow, sunset." Then she turned toward Eli and called out, "Let's go." The boy hopped up and took her hand. As they walked away, Eli glanced over his shoulder, curious. Callan stood rooted in place, every part of him unraveling in silence. Callan didn't move, not when the bookstore door shut gently behind her, not when the streets returned to their quiet rhythm, not even when the breeze shifted, brushing against his collar like an old friend reminding him to breathe. She was gone, again, but this time she'd looked him in the eye and told him where to find her. He sat down slowly on the bench where Eli had waited. The wood was worn smooth. Familiar. He glanced down. 3 letters, carved years ago, were still there. C+I nearly brought him to his knees. How many times had she passed this spot in the last decade? Had she noticed the initials? Had she told their son stories of the boy who used to sketch towers in the margins of his notebook? Or had she erased him entirely, for protection? Peace? He didn't blame her, not anymore. His mind reeled with images. Ilani curled beside him in the grass. Ilani humming off-key in the passenger seat of his truck. Ilani looking at him like he was the only thing that made sense. Now, she looked at him like a man who had missed a lifetime. And maybe that's exactly what he was. The sun dipped lower, casting the town in a deep amber hue. He walked back toward the hotel, slowly, each step heavier than the last. This trip was never about land, never about buildings. It was about reckoning, about facing the cost of what he'd lost while chasing everything else. He returned to the sketch Ilani once drew, still folded in his pocket. The small house, the oak tree, the initials carved in. He stared at it until the lines blurred through the burn in his eyes. Sunset came too fast, and yet not fast enough. He stood by the edge of the lake, under the old oak tree. It hadn't changed. Still tall, still rooted, like it had been waiting. He heard footsteps behind him. Turned. She was there. The lake stretched quiet under a sky of deep orange. The oak trees stood steady, casting long shadows like old memories across the water. Callan arrived first. He didn't sit. He waited, hands in his pockets, back straight, like someone standing trial. Because, in a way, he was. Ilani's footsteps were soft, but he felt them. She stopped a few feet away. The same space between them that time had created. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, not as ghosts, not as strangers. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you meant it," she replied. Her voice was calm, but not cold, not anymore. It was steadied by years of parenting alone, by forgiveness she gave herself long before she considered giving it to him. Callan exhaled. "There's no excuse for any of it." "No, there's not." He nodded. "I lost my phone that week. Everything. I never heard the message, never saw the texts. I didn't know. Ilani, I didn't know." Her jaw clenched for a breath, then loosened. "That doesn't make the silence hurt less." He looked down. "I thought you moved on. I told myself you were better off. I didn't think I deserved you." "Maybe you didn't," she said, not cruelly, just honestly. "But he did." That hit harder than any accusation. Callan's shoulders fell. "He's mine?" Her arms folded tightly across her chest, a quiet defense. "You really need to ask." He shook his head slowly. "No, I don't." She stepped closer, voice lower. "He doesn't know who you are. To him, you're just someone I used to know." The ache in his chest deepened. "I want to meet him. I want to know him." She nodded once. "I figured you would." Silence again. But this one was different. Not hostile, not loaded, just full. "Ilani," he whispered. "I missed everything." Her eyes glossed. "Yes, you did." "I want to be in his life," Callan said softly. "I don't expect it to be easy, but I'm here. Whatever it takes." Ilani looked down at the edge of the lake, then back up, steady and firm. "This isn't a redemption arc, Callan. You don't get to show up, say you're sorry, and pick up where you left off. That time is gone." He nodded. "I know. You can't rewrite the past. You weren't there for his first word. You didn't sit up with him through fevers or school projects, or nights when he asked why other kids had dads who picked them up. I would have. But you weren't." The words didn't come with anger. They came with reality. That made them land deeper. "I'm not asking for a pass," he said. "I'm asking for a start." Ilani studied him. "Are you willing to start from the beginning? As a stranger who has to earn trust, not just his, but mine?" Callan looked her in the eyes. "Yes. Whatever it takes." She nodded once. Slowly. "For now, you can be around. Casually. He'll know you as Callan, my old friend. That's it. No surprise introductions, no pressure, no fast moves." He accepted that. It was more than he deserved. Ilani looked out across the water. "He likes puzzles," she said. Callan tilted his head. "Yeah?" "He can sit for hours with one, rearranging the same pieces until they fit." He smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone I used to know." Ilani allowed a breath of a laugh. "And he's sharp. Too sharp sometimes. He'll start asking questions." "I'll wait until you're ready." She turned to him, eyes softer now. "Wait until he's ready." They stood quietly for a while, not as enemies, not as lovers, as two people standing over the wreckage of what almost was, searching for something worth saving. Before she left, she said one more thing. "Don't promise what you can't keep." He didn't. He just watched her walk away, this time with the weight of responsibility in his chest, not regret. The first time Callan visited Ilani's house, he wore the same nerves he used to carry before college interviews. Eli sat at the dining table, hunched over a puzzle with a juice box, and zero interest in the quiet man standing awkwardly by the door. Ilani offered him a chair. "You can sit with him. Just follow his lead." Callan sat, said nothing at first, watched. Eli didn't look up, but Callan noticed the quick glances from under his lashes. After a while, Callan leaned forward. "Corners first, right?" Eli nodded once. That was the beginning. The next visit, Callan brought a puzzle, not a flashy one, Just a classic 500-piece set. Vintage cars. Eli raised an eyebrow. You like these? Callan asked. Eli shrugged. Better than castles. They worked side by side in silence. No deep talk. Just shared space. By the time Ilani called him for dinner, Eli said something unexpected. You're better at this than Mom. Callan looked up. Don't tell her I said that. A smirk, half a joke, half a test. Callan smiled. Your secret's safe with me. It wasn't perfect. There were missteps. Callan once showed up late after a conference call ran long. Eli waited by the window, puzzle box in hand. Ilani didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her disappointment was quieter than a shout, but heavier. Callan never made that mistake again. He started learning the details. Eli liked strawberries but hated them when they were too cold. He hated math worksheets but loved solving riddles. He was afraid of bees, proud of his library card, and could never sleep without the little stuffed bear he called Captain. Callan started showing up more, not just with puzzles, but for school plays. Parent-teacher nights. Lunches packed by hand, not assistants. He asked about Eli's day and listened, really listened. The turning point came one evening. They were building a model city from blocks on the living room floor. Callan was explaining how real bridges needed tension cables to hold weight. Eli looked up. Is that why you didn't come before? Callan froze. Ilani was washing dishes in the kitchen, pretending not to listen. But he knew she was. Callan swallowed. I didn't know the way. And I wasn't strong enough to carry what I needed to. Not then. Eli considered this, then handed him a small block. Use this one. It's the strongest. Callan placed it carefully. Thanks, buddy. Later that night, Ilani walked him to the door. He's starting to like you, she said. I'm starting to like me, Callan answered, a little surprised at how true it felt. The air between them began to change, not quickly, not loudly, but in the quiet ways only two people with history can feel. Dinner became a rhythm. Not every night, but often enough that it started to feel like something solid. Eli would chatter through mouthfuls about school, books, or the latest trick he taught Captain the Bear. Ilani would shake her head, pretending to scold him for speaking with food in his mouth, but Callan could see the corners of her mouth, trying not to smile. He loved that smile, had always loved it. One evening, after Eli had gone to bed, Callan stayed behind to help with the dishes. Ilani pulled out a dusty crate from the hall closet. Found this today, she said, setting it on the kitchen table. Old records, scratched but still playable. Callan laughed quietly. You kept those? Of course, they're yours. No, ours. You were the only one who actually liked that slow jazz track. She rolled her eyes. That's because you only ever played it when you were trying to be dramatic. He held a hand to his chest, guilty. They laughed, not loudly, but honestly. They sat on the floor, cross-legged by the old player, listening to songs that smelled like 17. Ilani leaned back against the couch. Callan studied her in the amber glow of the lamp. She looked the same, but different. Time had added layers, strength, stillness, and something fragile he couldn't quite name. I'm scared, she said softly. Callan didn't answer. He let her speak. I know you're not who you used to be, but I don't know if I can ever go back to who I was either. He nodded slowly. Maybe we don't go back. Maybe we build something new. She met his eyes. And what if it falls again? Then we build it better. She closed her eyes for a moment, then leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. I want to believe you, she whispered. Then believe in us. Just a little at a time. It happened one night over warm brownies and a board game none of them were actually following. Eli was curled up between them, laughing so hard he dropped the dice. Ilani was pretending to pout at losing, and Callan leaned back with his arm barely grazing hers. It felt full, not loud, not showy, just full. And then Eli turned suddenly, looking between them with a mouth smudged with chocolate. Are you two going to get married? Silence. Ilani blinked. Callan looked like someone had cut the power to his lungs. Eli waited. You love each other, right? He added, with the clarity only a child can summon. Ilani gently brushed a crumb from Eli's cheek. That's a big question, baby. But you do, Eli said simply. You laugh, you don't fight, and he always comes back. Callan's voice was low. I didn't always. You do now, Eli replied. That's what matters. That night, after Eli went to bed, Callan lingered by the door again. Lonnie leaned against the frame, arms crossed, not in defense, but habit. You don't have to answer that, she said quietly. I already did, he replied. She looked up. I want to build something with you. No towers, no spotlights, just us. Ilani studied him. Words are easy, Callan. He nodded. That's why I bought the lot next door. Her breath caught. Wait. What? I closed on it yesterday. Small house, needs work, but it's close. Close enough for dinners, walks, and late-night brownie raids. You're staying? I already stayed. 2 weeks later, Ilani found him repainting the kitchen cabinets. Badly. Eli stood beside him, covered in more paint than the wood. You're hopeless, she muttered, laughing. Callan grinned, hopelessly committed. That night, as they tucked Eli in, Callan knelt. Not on one knee, not with a velvet box, but on the carpet beside the bed. Eli, he said, can I ask you something this time? Eli raised an eyebrow. Okay. Can I try to be your dad? Not just show up, but really be there. Always. Eli threw his arms around him without hesitation. Yes. But you still can't beat me at puzzles. Ilani stood by the doorway, tears caught behind a smile. When Callan turned to her, he didn't kneel. He just walked over and held out his hand. I don't need a grand moment, he said. I just need you to say yes to tomorrow, and the next, and the one after. Ilani didn't speak. She didn't have to. She placed her hand in his, and that was the answer. They didn't plan a ceremony that filled a ballroom. There were no limousines or orchestras, just a quiet patch of grass near the lake. The oak tree stood tall in the background, like a silent witness to both the fracture and the mending. Ilani wore a dress she found in a local shop. Simple, soft, real. Callan wore a tie Eli picked out, a crooked little thing with comic book. Prints no adult would choose, but he wore it like a badge of honor. They stood barefoot on the earth, not as two people rewriting a story, but two people choosing a new one. Together, Ilani's voice trembled as she spoke. I once believed love had to be perfect to be worth it. I know better now. I've learned that love isn't flawless, but it is faithful. It shows up, even when it's late. Callan took her hands. I used to think I had to build the world to matter, but the truth is, this, he nodded toward her and Eli, this is the world, and it's enough. Eli stood between them, holding both their hands, grinning like it was the greatest day of his life. Can I say something? He asked. Ilani smiled. Of course. Eli cleared his throat like a serious speaker. I now pronounce you Mom and Dad. They laughed. They cried. And just like that, without grand vows or a loud audience, they were a family. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were full. Breakfasts with laughter, afternoons of helping Eli build model cities, nights filled with records, soft talks, and windows cracked open to the sound of life returning. One evening, Callan stood on the back porch. Eli asleep upstairs. Ilani curled beside him with her head on his shoulder. He whispered, Do you think we did the right thing? She reached for his hand. No. I think we did the brave thing. Some stories aren't about perfect beginnings. They're about courageous returns, about showing up after silence, loving after pain, and choosing family after the world told you to chase something else. If you've ever longed for a second chance, or carried the weight of regret you thought was too heavy to lift, let this story remind you, it's never too late to begin again. Tell me in the comments, what does home mean to you? If this story stirred something in your heart, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true-to-life narratives that remind us of what really matters. And share this with someone who needs a little hope tonight, because here on Mr. Ross' Story Trail, we don't just tell stories. We find healing in them.